Akim Shalom. Before I begin this lesson, I want to start off by giving all glory, honor, and praises to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachakwadash, and double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who taught us the truth. A sincere Shalom to the hopeful like this out there, listening, learning, and or teaching in truth and sincerity. Shalom. All right, Akim. So today I want to go into a quick hit. Just going into how it's important to give the Lord his time, and when it pertains especially to, studying and learning, okay? Because, of course, I made videos about how it's important to make videos and go to the highways, all right? But, behind the scenes, the things that nobody sees, like reading, studying, going into rabbit holes and getting into the scriptures, of course, whether you're listening to an audio, if you're on the go, but especially you want to sit down and go into the scriptures. You want to sit down and study. You want to go ahead and look up articles and research things and filter through the scriptures, so on and so forth. All right. So with that, we're gonna get Sirach 38, and we're gonna go ahead and read verse 24. All right, I'm gonna click on it right here. Sirach 38 and 24, it says, "The wisdom of a learned man cometh by opportunity of leisure." Okay, so we got this word leisure, all right, in the etymology. Okay, C 1300 Leasure. It means free time, time at one's disposal, right? So, you could think about this like, let's say you got a job, you work in 12s, right? 12-hour shifts, but then one day they send you home early because they ran out of work. And that day you only work 8 hours, right? Well, see, now you got a 4-hour window. What are you going to do with those 4 hours? You see, that's where you got to prioritize this truth. Prioritize Yahweh Bashim Al Shai, because it's very easy to get caught up in scrolling, doom scrolling as they call it, right? You might watch Netflix or go watch a game, or you might do any number of things that has nothing to do with this truth. Okay, so what the scriptures are saying, wisdom of a learned man cometh by opportunity of leisure, right? So when you got time, you ought to be studying, man. Like a good example, sometimes when I'm at work, they give us downtime, or maybe it's less busy that day. Well, if it's less busy and you could get on your phone, it's a good idea to go ahead and look up an article about current events, see what's going on. A lot of us get notifications anyway when news. You could go on these different news apps. You could go on look at your YouTube notifications, and you could see a lot of times brothers will be posting videos, or news articles will show up in your feed, and you can quickly get an idea. Oh yeah, I might want to go into a lesson on that later, and you can save it on your phone. And if you got 5 minutes of downtime, that's 5 minutes you could get into that. So seizing the opportunity, man. Whether you get small amount of leisure or whether you get a lot, preferably a lot if it's possible. That's where you're going to learn the most. Like if you have a whole hour to sit down and listen to a breakdown, all right, take notes, highlight it on your Bible, and research it and go into rabbit holes yourself on that topic, and then boom, that'll be, that hour of studying, you'll have lessons upon lessons to go into, all right? And then that's going to all build on top of itself, which, the elder brother was just talking about it today. He was like, every little bit you go into every day, some of it's going to stick. Some of it may fall off, but a lot of it will stick, because with time, we're learning and relearning. Okay, certain things we'll be reminded of, and then the things that stick, they stick, and eventually things are gonna keep sticking. Okay, and so this is a constant process, man. It's just like anything you learn in life, which this is gonna go into, like different professions. Okay, so it continues. And he that hath little business shall become wise. You see? Let's keep it going. Verse 25. How can he get wisdom that holdeth the plow, right? Let's say you out there, your job is to plow dirt, right? And you working on that every day. Let's say you working 80 hours a week. Well, if you working 80 hours a week, and then when you get home, you got to run errands, you got to do this, you got to do that. Okay, you don't have time for the truth, or you have very little time, man. It says, and that glorieth in the gold. All right, let's go into that real quick, see what that's about. Gold. Old English, gad, point, squarehead, arrowhead, pointed stick, used for driving cattle. Right, so you're driving cattle, or you're a husbandman, right? These are examples of different professions. It says that driveth oxen and is occupied in their labors. Right, you occupied in your labors. Let's say somebody trying to get the bag, or a Jake just trying to get rich, or be a high-end rapper in this world, and escape the rat race, so called. All right, trying to be a supervisor or at his job, or trying to be a manager, right? Certain managers, I believe to become a manager in a lot of these different fields, you can't call out, right? So it makes it very basically, you sell your soul for this company, man. And so if you're a part of that company, yeah, you're gonna make a lot of money, but then you're not gonna have any time to think. You just become a soulless robot for this company, man. And in this truth, you gotta think. You've got to have free time, and you got to be able to look things up, read, listen to videos, study, take notes, and think. Go into these rabbit holes, man. And the spirit will work with you when you have this free time, and that's how you're gonna add a lot of wisdom to yourself, man. It says, and whose talk is of bullocks, right? If all you talking about is your profession, how do I improve these numbers and those numbers? That's a full-time job. And then when you go home, you're thinking about your job, man. I remember when I was a high-level salesman at one of my old jobs, man, how I really was able to climb up the ladder. And when I say climb up the ladder, just basically, be a better worker than the other workers, and try to get a higher bonus. The way I would do it is I would have to go home and spend a good hour when I get home. Like when I was learning, spend a good hour at home, studying the different the different things that pertain to my job, and what I'm going to say in this situation, or how I'm going to do this in that situation, and really problem solve, so that when I go to work, okay, now I'm more prepared than everybody else. All right, but if you're too busy doing that, chasing money, maybe you're chasing women, maybe you're chasing something else entirely, guess what? You ain't got no time for the Lord. You ain't got no time for this truth. You're not going to amass a lot of wisdom, man. All right. Let's keep it going. Verse 26, it says, he giveth his mind to make furrows, and is diligent to give the kind fodder. So every carpenter and workmaster that laboreth night and day, and they that cut and grave seals, and are diligent to make great variety, and give themselves to counterfeit imagery, and watch to finish a work. Right? So notice how it's going into all these professions, man, because the truth in and of itself is like a skill, and it's like something that you learn. It's got a learning curve, man. So you're gonna have a lot of things that you got to study. It's layers to it. Even the elders and apostles who've been doing this for decades, man, they're still learning new things, man. They've got the 100% truth already, but basically, as prophecy unfolds, they're saying that we're getting more details out of these prophecies now, because we're living them. Okay, and so before, maybe a decade ago, it was less clear. Even though we knew the end, we knew the outcome of the chip, then the thermonuclear destruction of Babylon, but now it's being more clear exactly how these things are going to happen, so on and so forth. And of course, the elders and apostles are always going into rabbit holes and bringing things out, new information and stuff like that. So It's just like a master carpenter or a master at any field. They're always learning new tricks, and they have all these old tricks, and they're always looking to improve and become more efficient. Okay, and I want to grab a precept to that, man. This is 2 Timothy. Let me see. 2 and verse 15. It says, "Study to show thyself approved unto the Most High," right? Studying the scriptures, going into, different breakdowns, and really, tying it all together inside you, man, because, this word has to be a part of you, man. It can't just be like, oh, I'm going to write these breakdowns down and then I'm going to just, bring out these pieces of paper when I need them. It's like, no, you got to really internalize everything and going into those rabbit holes and, reading it and rereading it, and hearing it in different ways. That's going to really cement it inside your spirit, inside your mind, so that now, you become a master, right? So it says, "Study to show thyself approved unto the Most High, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth," right? Why do you rightly divide the word of truth without shame? Because we constantly studying and going into it and bringing out the 100% truth of the scriptures, man. Now a lot of these other camps, they don't do that because they don't really study like that. You see, here at Great Millstone, we say we have the 100% truth because we really are sincere and we go into these, we go into it. Okay. We're not here to make money. We're here to receive salvation. All right. And to receive salvation is going to take everything. Like the scripture says, the righteous shall scarcely be saved, man. So we'll barely be saved, but we will be saved, Lord's will, if we endure to the end, man. So this is deadly serious, man. This is a deadly serious profession, man. However, not a profession, but a job. Well, yeah, it is a profession. We're getting paid by the Lord, ultimately. But let's get this word workman. 2 Timothy 2:15 real quick. A workman, G2040, or gates, says a workman, a laborer, usually one who works for hire, an agricultural worker, one who does, a worker, perpetrator, toiler, right? Someone is working, figuratively, a teacher, right? A laborer, right? A teacher is also a laborer. Okay, so you could just think about it like that's your craft, man. Like you got different boxers, right? Like Mike Tyson and Floyd Mayweather and Muhammad Ali, and these men were all great at their craft because they took the time to master it. Through endless hours at the gym, watching their fights on tape and studying how they move, how their opponents move, and how to improve that situation, so on and so forth. All right, it's the same thing with this truth. All right, and really it boils down to just setting aside time for the Lord, setting aside time for Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, man. All right, and giving the Lord your time, man. Making sacrifices, man. That's something the Lord has had on my spirit for the past few days, especially today, man. It's just like you got to make sacrifices, man. Sometimes you get off work and you just want to chill because you've been going through hell. But it's like sometimes you need to take a step back and think and be like, well, I just got off work. I know I only got a few hours left before I got to go to bed. How can I really optimize this time for the Lord instead of just let me just do whatever I want to do, acting on emotion like a brute beast? Oh, let me go to the kitchen and grab a snack. Nah, fuck the snack. I got something to think about, man. Something, this thing just happened earlier, with ICE being in the airports now, and then they also got, there's a lot of things going on in the world with, with the Iran war, and it's like, okay, I can make videos on that, I need to work on my discipline when it comes to this, that, and the third. Just sometimes you got to just take time, and then once you get slowed down, now you can really calm your mind down. Your body can be like, all right, I'm relaxed now. Now you can sit down, on a chair at a table and then think and then, pull out your sword, start reading, go into some rabbit holes, or, work on yourself. Okay, and giving the Lord his time. And sometimes you got to make time. You don't always have time. Sometimes you got to make time, man. I remember at one of my old plantations, I used to go to the bathroom to look at what's going on. I used to go to the bathroom sometimes just to pray, you know? And that's where I want to bring out Proverbs 3 and 9, man. It says, honor Yahweh with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thy increase, man. Which, the elder talks about this a lot when he says, giving the Lord your first fruits, waking up in the morning and the first thing you do, is give the Lord his time, or, this also applies after the plantation too, right? Because that's the only time you're free, in the morning before the plantation and then after the plantation, right? And sometimes you get little pockets in the plantation, which I try to utilize those too, all right? And so ultimately, just going back full circle, man, all right, like we read in Sirach 38, it's very important to give the Lord his time, which I want to get that again in 24 real quick. It says, the wisdom of a learned man cometh by opportunity of leisure, and he that hath little business shall become wise, right? If you ain't got a whole lot going on outside of this truth, you're setting yourself up in a good position, man. All right, that's why Apostle Paul said it's better not to marry, because if you marry, you're going to have trouble in the flesh. Nevertheless, if you're burning, it's better to marry. So, use that with balance. That's why I say, if you brothers can, don't deal with these women unless it's just, something quick. It's best not to have them in your, in your house, like in a full blown relationship, unless they're, halfway decent, what I'm saying, just based off of, if they're willing to work with you. But, that's not what the video is about, going into women too much, but basically just giving the Lord his time, not having a woman or not having a whole lot of stuff going on, right? Let's say you work and then you got a bunch of hobbies. You might have to cut one of those hobbies out, all right? So now I want to go to the next chapter real quick. Chapter 39. And we're just going to read verse 1. It says, but he that giveth his mind to the law of the Most High and is occupied in the meditation thereof, right? So you're giving your mind to the law, right? Which really is the whole Bible, because you got laws in the Old Testament, you got laws in the New, right? He that giveth his mind to the law of the Most High and is occupied in the meditation thereof will seek out the wisdom of all the ancient and be occupied in prophecies, right? Exactly. So we seek out the wisdom of all the ancient, man. We eat the full roll. Okay, so you want to go into those prophecies, you want to go into the history and connect the history. Why? So you can understand the mystery, man. Like the elders and apostles always say, you got to know the history to understand the mystery. Okay, and that's why we're able to connect. Okay, who are the 12 tribes? We go into history, we filter it through the scriptures, right? We go into the biblical history itself. We go into the Deuteronomy 28, bring out the curses. That's prophecy. Okay, this is what would happen to the Israelites. Think about how long that took our apostles and elders, man, going all the way back to Abba Bivens, right? To figure out who the tribes were. Okay, why we're in this condition, and then what's going to happen in the future, connecting all that with who is Esau, who are these other heathen nations, and, that's a hard job, man. That's like a carpenter who could build a house all by himself. That doesn't happen overnight, man. That comes by opportunity. It takes time. So you got to put in your time in this truth, man. You really got to put in the time. It's not enough to know you're an Israelite. It's not enough to, just watch videos. No, you got to actually take the time to be in that quiet room, sitting down at a table, doing research, going into the scriptures, taking notes, really thinking about these things, and the Spirit working with you, man. And then you'll be able to gain that wisdom. So Yeah, Akim, just a quick hit going into how it's important to give the Lord his time in order to study. And it's important to study and showing yourself approved, you know, and this is going to show in your lessons, it's going to show in your walk, because it's not just about making lessons. You're going to apply these things you learn now. You're going to apply them in your own life as well. Okay, so with that, I want to finish by giving all glory, honor, and praises to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rachak Wadash. Double honor to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone that taught us this truth. A sincere shalom to the hopeful elect that's out there listening, learning, and or teaching in truth and sincerity. Shalom wa. Abba Abba Shalom.